Hello and welcome to Spotlight on Senior Issues. This is a series of programs concerning topics of interest to senior citizens, our fastest growing aspect of our population today. Whether you're a senior citizen or your parents or grandparents are, hopefully this series will bring information to help you prepare for topics that come up. Today we're focusing on living wills and power of attorney, some topics that you may have heard about but don't know a lot about. Hope to answer those questions today. Joining me, Christopher Dumm, attorney, and we have Alan Buckley, a general and trauma surgeon at Freeman, and Joseph Newman, wound specialist at Freeman. Thank you all for being here today. We hear the term living wills and power of attorney. Sometimes people say, oh, that's something I've heard about from my parents or grandparents. Let's start off with a definition. What do we say when we say, well, what's a living will?
Okay, well, a living will is a document, sometimes it's called an advanced health directive, where in advance you are stating, if I get to an end-of-life situation where I'm permanently incapacitated or permanently medically incapacitated, or I have a terminal illness and I'm at the end stages, this is the type of health care I do or do not want.
Okay, so you're stating your wishes before you would encounter that situation.
Right.
How does a power of attorney then tie into that?
A power of attorney is where you are stating ahead of time that you're giving the power to make medical decisions to a third party, to someone else, usually your spouse or a family member, because otherwise, legally, if you don't have a durable power of attorney, then the court has to determine who's going to make medical decisions for you.
So help really expedite things, make things work a lot better for families and patients and so forth.
Yes.
From the medical side, I know when people go to the hospital, I know if my father was in the hospital, one of the first questions they ask is, does he have this directive? So you want to know that right offhand as a physician.
Well, it's important, especially if there's an emergency type situation and there is or isn't one. If there is one, that gives us some direction. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point and the care is something that everybody recovers from, but as we all know, sometimes there are tight spots that people get into, and then we need to be able to approach the family and say, hey, listen, we need to have a long talk.
And Alan probably faces that more often because he deals with trauma victims, and they can come in unconscious, and the family may never discussed what they want done, and so someone has to be the designated decision maker. And we've actually even had to go to court, and what's the correct term?
Well, you go to
a guardian or somebody
that
has to make the decisions, because sometimes those decisions need to be made pretty immediately.
Right. So when you're in an emergency situation, you don't have time.
Well, when you're in an emergency, you do what you have to do, but then there are things that need to be done that you need some direction from the family, and it's always better to know up front what your position is before you dive into anything.
So people are probably asking, well, where do we get this paperwork? I mean, is it something you're handed when you go to the hospital? Is it something we need to visit an attorney beforehand? How do we start the process of filling out these papers?
The answer is yes.
All the above.
Anytime.
The best is probably to go to your attorney and talk through the issues of who you want to be in control, when you want them to be in control, of when you're not in control. Not just on financial issues, but like we're talking today on medical issues. The Missouri Bar on its website, which I believe is mobar.gov or .org, they have a sample model healthcare power of attorney that people can go to and download. Sometimes it can be kind of confusing. Information on end-of-life issues, we have on our website some information, protectingwealth.com, that people can go there. But most attorneys can do a power of attorney. I think you should talk with them and talk through what powers you do want to give to someone and what powers you don't.
What are some examples of medical questions that people are asked when they have this decision? I mean, we've heard about, do I want to be on a respirator? What are just some of the choices that people are facing?
Well, I just want to add also, not everybody has an attorney. Everybody should have someone they could turn to, like Chris, that's what he does. When people come to our office, they're actually offered a patient bill of rights, it's called, and a pamphlet that actually asks that question and then directs them to a website. I work at Freeman, so freemanhealth.com, I believe.
I believe both hospitals have, if you want to sign one, a generic document that gives limited powers. Both
And-
hospitals have that capability.
And what that asks is those specific type of questions. There's maybe some documents may be just a few questions, but there can be a detailed document. And one of the first things is, in the event that you can't make a decision, who would you like to direct? If you've got a big family, maybe your spouse would be the person if you don't have a directive, but maybe your spouse has other health issues, or they're not really somebody who's savvy about knowing how to do that. Maybe you have a child who is in the healthcare professions who might have a little better handle on that, and you could designate them as the person that you would like to make those decisions. One of the biggest things we run into is that if you've got a sick family member in the hospital and they're unable to make decisions, and someone like me or a nurse approaches them, sometimes it can be a little bit contentious because of all the anxiety and fear that's associated with making the decision at that time. Mm-hmm. So having that up front is quite helpful. If you have a critical illness, a lot of times the clergy at the hospital, one of the things they can do is come and help with that. We have social workers who can help with some of those things as well. To get back to your question though, there's a difference between different types of care. So for example, you might say, well, if I get sick or sicker than I am now, do I want to have types of life support? Things like, am I going to be on a ventilator or a breathing machine? Am I going to be given nutrition either through a tube or through my veins? Am I going to have resuscitation done like CPR if my heart stops? Will I want medicines that will only prolong my life, or is there a chance that I might get better? And sometimes as physicians we don't know all the answers to those things, mm-hmm. and so it's important to sort of discuss those things with people up front. What we commonly get is, I don't want to be on a machine. There's a lot of things between I'm healthy, living my life independently, and being on a machine, and then there's a lot of things from being on a machine to being at death's door. And so having that discussion with somebody ahead of time while you're sitting down at dinner certainly is a better way to go.
So you would recommend communication. I mean, talking
It
to
also
those parents.
it's also a great tool, and Al can probably agree with this, is when you have a large family and everybody wants to talk to the doctor at once. If you have that dedicated person that is this family spokesperson, that's typically the one that may have the power of attorney or whatever, mm-hmm. then I know that in times past, we would communicate with that person every day, and then they would disseminate the information. Because you can't, if you have a huge family and there's very serious issues, you can't talk to every single one of them every day. So, and the other thing I would add is these documents are changeable too. I mean, if you decide, yeah, I do want to be on a ventilator, when you said you didn't, you can change it.
You can revise it.
It's not set in stone. So, right, Chris?
Yes, that's right. Good doctor.
Now, with today's society, where sometimes you have, especially the senior citizens, that don't have direct family members maybe living in town, mm-hmm. How do they decide, well, who's going to be my power of attorney? Their son or daughter lives out of town. How do they decide, or how do they look at, who's responsible?
I can answer that because I deal with a lot of elderly people in wound care, because mm-hmm. they have, the older you get, the more difficult it is to heal things. And I've got several patients that have that exact scenario where it's an elderly person and their immediate family is either on either coast or somewhere way away, and they have other close family members, or they have even neighbors. I have a 96-year-old gentleman who is, I think the lady is like 72, his neighbor, brings him in mm-hmm. for his appointment. She's his power of attorney, and that's not an uncommon scenario.
So we really need to look at your own personal life.
Yes.
Who do you have that
Who's
is
around?
able to take that role?
And a lot of churches will kind of help you with that as well if you're in a church family. So.
But it's very helpful when you're in a medical situation with a senior in the hospital or a parent to have maybe one child, if they have multiple children, who say, "I'll be the one talking to the doctor." That.
It's for that reason I usually counsel my clients. I tell them, now this is your power of attorney. You can do what you want. Mm-hmm. But if you agree the kids are going to talk to themselves, they're going to talk before they make a decision. I've heard from the medical community that they would like to have one person who is the chairman. They don't mind if decisions are made in committee, mm-hmm. but they want to be able to only converse with the chairman and get their instructions back from the person who's making the decision.
Now, with the health privacy laws, do they have to take an extra step to be able to find about mom or dad's medical records to be able to talk to you? You know, or
Of course they do.
so they can't just walk up and say, "Hi, I'm
Don't
Sue
get
Smith,"
us
and
don't get us started on that.
No,
Yeah.
but they need to go through the proper clearances to be that representative. To do
Right.
that.
I think one of the important documents besides a power of attorney and a living will would be a HIPAA authorization form. And HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And they have a plethora of privacy issues in there. And so all my clients sign an authorization form, and we try to get everybody who they possibly would want to know what's going on. We try to get them on that form. That just means that Joe and Al can talk to them. It doesn't mean that, you know, the power of attorney states who's going to make the decision,
Right.
but it frees it up for the physicians and for the medical personnel to talk to all the family if they're on that HIPAA authorization form.
There's two P's in HIPAA. It's the Health Information Portability and Privacy Act.
Oh,
And the problem is that the portability gets lost. It's very difficult to transfer a lot of records. The privacy is the thing that people get concerned about. So being able to prove that you're the spouse or the son or the daughter, and a lot of times it's sometimes difficult, and there are certain situations where it's almost impossible to decide who that person is without some sort of paperwork to make it happen. And sometimes you actually have to get a judge to decree that, believe
The
it or
legal
not.
aspects involved.
And
in
I've
taking care
had
of it.
situations where I've had disgruntled family members because, you know, cousin Billy's calling in and wants to know about Uncle John, and I said, you know, are you on the document? And if they are, I'll talk to them, but I have to have explicit permission to
Permission
talk
to
to
be able to
them.
present that and tie all that
It's
together.
gotten, in my opinion, to the point of ridiculousness, but
Some hurdles that
That's
you,
my
you know,
opinion.
challenge and that you have
It
to
sure
face.
can be.
You have the living will, the directive. Is this something that you recommend someone keeps at home? Do they put it on file somewhere from an attorney's aspect? They fill out this paperwork. What do they do with it after that?
Again, I'd say yes on all accounts. They should have it at home. Family members that they trust should have a copy of it. They should have it in their chart at the
So make
the
sure
hospital.
the medical
In the
facility.
record.
Mhm.
Yeah, in their records. They're even online. You know, our clients, we actually put copies with an online service, and then they're issued a card that they carry around so that no matter where they are, they're never more than a 1-800 phone call and getting those documents faxed.
So somebody's traveling and they have that accident out of state, they
Right.
still have the ability to say, I have those statements prepared.
Right.
And with electronic health records, those documents are typically scanned into the patient's permanent record. So once it's in the system, it's there. So they don't have to duplicate the paperwork every time they come in.
Now, if they decide to change their mind, like you mentioned, then they
Right.
just need to
Yeah.
make sure they get those proper documents added for updating them.
Right.
Right.
And so forth. What about, people might ask, well, who determines, that end of life or that terminal illness and so forth? Do you have to have a certain number of doctors to say we've reached that point where decisions have to be made? If you're looking at, confirming a medical condition.
The type of living will that we typically use in my office says that there needs to be 2 physicians, one of whom is your attending physician.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that that's,
There's no
always the
standard that I
case.
know anything
There-
about.
Right.
There's no legal definition for, say, brain death. We get that sometimes. There's criteria that you can define this person is brain dead. But even talking before that issue, oftentimes it's helpful to family members if there is agreement amongst various physicians. Typically, if you get to the point in a critical illness where you're talking about needing emergency care or end-of-life care, with emergency care, let's say somebody comes in and they've had a horrible accident and need emergency surgery, sometimes we actually proceed with that before we actually can contact anybody.
Right.
But it's follow-up things. They need to go back to the operating room for something else. It's helpful for that patient to hear that from more than one physician that needs to happen. If it gets to the point where we want to add additional life-saving therapy, dialysis, a ventilator, nutrition, it's helpful that they hear that from more than one doctor caring for them. And in those situations, there's usually 2 or 3 or 4 physicians who are doing care because we do require some specialized care.
And when you're looking at the senior population, you're looking at not only perhaps emergency accident situations, but some of those long-term situations like dementia or Alzheimer's or cancer and so forth, where maybe as a medical community you have kind of a sense of how things are going to progress. I mean, do you work with people that way?
I tell you, one of the casualties of healthcare recently, in my opinion, has been the loss of the patient's primary care physician coming to the hospital and being involved in the care. And it's just a different model that we have nowadays. Most primary care physicians have an office practice now and are not involved with the care once they come to the hospital. I've contacted the primary care doctor in the past and talked to them, but that's more the exception rather than the rule, because the typical answer is, well, you know, I'm not there, you do what you think is right. So they get this whole new group of doctors that you have to establish a relationship with in a pretty quick fashion. But it's something that we've learned how to do, and so we're able to do that.
Working with the new system. What about when you're dealing with older parents or grandparents and they're taking a lot of medications? They have, you know, a list of prescriptions, or they have a bottle of pills they take, and how important is it to let you know in the medical facility when they come in for treatment what they're already taking as far as medications?
It's critical.
The single best thing that anybody who listens to this program could do would be make sure they have a copy of those medicines in their wallet. And you can either, if it's a short list, write them down, or preferably have them on some sort of little computer piece of paper where the medicine is spelled right, the dose is spelled right, and you can get those from the pharmacist, or with the electronic medical records that most doctors' offices have now, they'll print them out. Every patient that leaves my office, we give them a list of the medications up to date as far as we know it. Now, as a surgeon, I don't prescribe lots of long-term medicines, but from a primary care doctor's office, it's a great way to get an updated list and keep those with you. That's a big deal, especially in this day and age where so many of our older patients are on blood thinners and medicines that affect their neurologic function and their blood pressure. And if we miss a few doses of that, that could impact their health.
Imagine, Dr. Newman, we're dealing with wounds and people trying, if they're on that blood thinner and you're trying to get someone to be cured or to take care of them.
It's always an ongoing battle. I mean, we ask them to bring in their medicine jars first time we see them to make sure that the list that is on the computer is actually what they're taking, and it doesn't corroborate very often.
And then I guess after someone leaves the hospital, they need to then update it if you've prescribed things after that hospital visit, or sometimes I've heard seniors concerned about, well, this medication is going to interact with that one, you know, so how do we make sure things aren't countering each other?
Well, it's a huge issue because there is, as Al can attest, sometimes people come in on literally 30 different medications. I mean, it's unbelievable. How can you keep track of that?
So there's perhaps a lot of different specialized medical facilities they're visiting, whether their case, you know, may be, you know.
Yeah, people are living longer, and the advancements in all the medications are making that possible. So
tying that together and communicating once again, working all of that together. What about the form itself? Does it need to be notarized? I mean, people might be watching and say, okay, we can fill out this form. Is it something we need to have it notarized with witnesses? You know,
the living will portions, or the advanced healthcare directive, needs to have 2 witnesses, but not a notary.
Okay.
The power of attorney in Missouri and in, I believe in all 4 states, requires a notary public. Okay. Now in Oklahoma, the power of attorney requires 2 witnesses and a notary.
So know your state laws.
That's right, know your state laws.
And how is that expected? So having that official document, and how long does it last? I mean, someone may, you know, they're in their 60s and say, I'm going to get this because I'm getting older. Do they need to update it? Do they need to, you know, do you get people to come up at the hospital and say, well, I filled one out 20 years ago? You know?
Yeah, I think we suggest that a power of attorney is redone every 5 to 7 years, whether you're not making any changes or not, because that way it helps eliminate the doubt from a third party of wondering, I wonder if this is still valid. Because if it's 20 years old, you're wondering, gee, I wonder what has changed since then. If it's 20 minutes old, you wonder if they were competent when they signed it. There was a gun to their head. So we like to have it done every 5 to 7 years.
You brought up the term competent when they signed it. Sometimes, you know, people end up in medical facilities and maybe they're not completely on their wits. You know, how do you determine, is this person capable of signing this form?
Well, I'm not a physician. I'd like to defer to these guys, but
We're not psychiatrists.
yeah, everybody's diving for cover here. We do the best we can. What I personally do is I look. How are they dressed? Are their shoes on the right feet? Are they? Do they look to the average person? Do they look like if they were walking down the street? You'd think that their car broke down. You wouldn't think, gee, this person lives underneath the bridge. I think just common sense questions that you could ask them. Who's the president? Although I know not Jay Leno, but he used to do, man on the street, and you couldn't believe what some of the questions. So that might not be a good question, but it is good that someone they have to be competent in order to name somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first thing we ask our patients isn't, "Hey, have you done this? Do you have a medical directive?" We take a history and a physical and talk to them. And if I'm visiting with you and you're able to tell me that you're having these symptoms and that your doctor is this person and these are the medicines I take, and I ask you to wiggle your toes and move your fingers and breathe deeply in and out, and your family comes in and out and recognizes you, I'm pretty comfortable that you're able to make most decisions. If there's questions, who's the president, what's the year, do you know where you are? Mm-hmm. If you've been in an accident and you've got your bell rung, you might not. You may not have had your bell rung and have some issues, but most of the time on a physical exam, it'll be fairly apparent, and then you can write in the chart, patient alert and oriented, and seems to be competent to make medical decisions. If that's the next step is to fill out one of those things. What we're trying to do is talk to people about getting those filled out before they show up, so that doesn't become an issue, of course.
So you recommend the people when they go in even for that regular checkup at the doctor saying, hey, I need to fill out this form.
I think it's on the entrance questionnaire every time. Do you have a living will or advance directive?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
you
correct?
enter the hospital.
It is, and then on your discharge paperwork, there's again a web link where you can go and download one, or it suggests that you contact an attorney or someone to get that filled out.
So there's a lot of opportunities for people to do this.
Absolutely.
Yes.
What about the age? We're talking about senior issues. Young people who, you're young, you're invincible, nothing's going to happen to you. Do you recommend that, that young family person go ahead and get that taken care of in their
I did it in, how old was I? In my 30s, probably. Mm-hmm. Back when we first met many years ago. So yeah, if you, because not only is the advance directive something, it's if you have children, it's what's the disposition of your children if you and your spouse get killed. I know that's a different topic, but
Right.
It's all kind of tied in together, the medical decision making and
A lot of
all
times
those
people
kinds
think
of
of the
things.
legal will for their estate or their items, but not the medical side of the.
Right, and I think the thing that can make us think of the importance of doing it early is, the two seminal cases on this that went, that we've all heard of. One was the Nancy Cruzan case, which was in Jasper County,
Right.
and she was a fairly young woman. And then the latest case was the Terry Schiavo case. Mm-hmm. Well, she became, incapacitated, I believe, when she was 18 or 19 years old. Who would think that a 19-year-old would have to have a medical power of attorney? Well, her husband, eventually got, the right by court to make the decision, and it was a lot different than what her family wanted. And if she would have, if she wanted her family to make, her mom and dad to make the decision and not her husband, if she'd had a power of attorney, we never would have heard about this case.
So young people, as soon as they're of age, basically, able to sign your own legal documents, find out this is the time to do it.
Yes, I mean, we also have, the shooting that occurred in Virginia Tech. Mm-hmm. And when that occurred, there were families that were calling in to the hospital, to the school, and the school and the hospital told them the same thing. We can't confirm or deny this person's here or enrolled here. If you don't have a power of attorney, we don't care if you're paying the tuition bill. We can't give you any information.
So let me ask you a question about, because I have a daughter who turned 18 this month, is going to school in the fall. I would assume that as her parent, and she's unattached, that the court would, or the hospital would say, you're her dad, I will talk to you and I will let you sign a permit to have her treatments. Is that not the case?
That is not the case.
if she's incapacitated.
if she's incapacitated. And now, before she became incapacitated, if she was lucid before she became unconscious, and they asked the question, "Hey, do you want us to divulge information to people?" "Oh yeah, you can give it to anybody," or "My mom and dad, make sure you talk to them." And then she goes unconscious. That will then govern. But in absence of prior information, I tell clients, they have to treat your kids as if they were, CIA agents, and they can't disclose or confirm or deny who they are or where they are.
So another thing that maybe when you send your kids off to college, you pack up the books in the car, but also here's this piece of paper signed before we go.
That's right.
And tie all that together. In addition to these topics, people also think about perhaps organ donation. And this is something you recommend stating ahead of time, that if I'm in a situation, I make my case known or what I'd like to have done as far as organ donations.
Yes, I made a mistake one time where I asked, actually it was a retired farmer, I had an organ donation form, and I said, "Sir, would you like to make an organ donation?" He looked at me and he said, "Well, not today." And so you want to make sure you sign it before you pass away, but it doesn't take effect until you would otherwise pass away.
These are other things that have really important overtones in the event of an injury, because we can think we know what we want to do, but we don't know what we want to do. An interesting story I had when I was a young surgeon in training was a trauma victim who was a college student, and his mother was a ICU nurse and came to the hospital after his devastating head injury, brain dead young man, and she was wearing a Donate Life lapel pin. And she said that she couldn't donate because it was just something that was not something they'd ever talked about, and it was just too emotional for her at the time. And she knew sort of from a medical standpoint that it was a good thing to do, or something that she had thought about that ought to be done, but from an emotional standpoint, faced with the immediate loss of her son, couldn't do it. And so having that conversation in a more detached time might allow a more sort of cogent
So another
kind
thing
of
to
thought
communicate with
process.
people is you find a way to
Yes.
bring those topics up and tie
Same
them
way,
together.
and it's the same way with if you're mom and you're the child.
Right. Let them both discussions, both sides of
Absolutely,
it. Support.
absolutely.
So a lot of things to think about: living wills, power of attorney, what we need to look, as far as when we have to go to the medical facility for care for seniors as well as people of all ages for today. So I'd like to thank you for being here on this program.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having
Great
us.
time.
And I'd like to thank you for joining us this week for Spotlight on Senior Issues. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join us in upcoming weeks as we continue to look at issues affecting seniors in our community and find out how we can get more informed and learn more about what's involved. I'll see you then.